Now that the NFL draft is over, I want to ask, what is Omar Khan doing that's right that has let everyone feel so strong about this year's draft class and last year's draft class? Joining me today is Alan Saunders from SteelersNow.com. I'm Chris Carter of the Locked On Steelers podcast. We'll talk about that, the pairing of offensive tackles with Broderick Jones and Fautanu, and the Cameron Sutton question, all here and more. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. Thank you for making us your first listen every day, because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and as a big fan of Monopoly Go, you got to download it right now. It's a mobile hit twist on the classic Monopoly game. Join your friends and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. As of before, we're joined by the man himself, Alan Saunders. He's back here from SteelersNow.com. We both had the busy weekend of doing draft stuff. I was doing live streams for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. My man Alan Saunders was recording in the dark out there in the indoor facility of the Pittsburgh Steelers there, but he was on site. And Alan, we talked about this a little bit on Channel 11 WPXI's Final Word show, which we were both on TV late last night. If you missed out on that, do go check that out. But Alan, you mentioned this is your final word, and it was ironically what I wanted to talk to you about. Going into this draft process, you and I mentioned it several times with the offensive lineman. Center, like drafting center at 20th overall would have been going a bit early with this class. So, but if you didn't do it then, you'd probably have to trade up to get the center if you wanted to get either of Graham Barton, Jackson Powers-Johnson, or Zach Frazier in the second round. And the Steelers said, nah, son, I don't need to do all that. I'm going to get both of them. And that's what Omar Khan did. And you mentioned how this guy, Omar Khan, at least in the last 2 years, last year, the Steelers were aggressive. They moved up when they needed to move up. They moved down when they could move down to get draft picks back. And he seems to have had a good beat for how the rest of the NFL is going to interpret these draft classes. What do you think has led to at least these early results? We don't know if these guys are Hall of Famers, but as far as getting the value where we're all ranking these guys, this is 2 years in a row. He's impressed people.
I think it's his strength, right? And maybe it wasn't obviously his strength when he took the job, but what Omar Khan did before he was the Steelers general manager was he ran their salary cap, he kept their books in line, and he did their contract negotiations. Now, Kevin Colbert had a scouting background. Most general managers have a scouting background. They're all about picking the best players. They want to look at the players and say, I like A better than B, I like B better than C, and I think I'm better than that than the other guys are, and that's how I'm going to win in the draft. And I think what Omar has done is he's almost taken the game theory approach, right? Where okay, all I need is Andy, rank these players for me. Andy Waddle, Steelers assistant general manager. Okay, now I'm going to figure out what the other teams are going to do. And when your whole focus and look, he was with the Steelers for 20 years. It's not like this was like a short time as this expert. He spent 20 years maximizing value on contracts because he knew what other teams were thinking about those players. When somebody walked in and said, hey, I want $29 million, he'll be like, no, nobody else is going to give you $29 million. We'll give you 27 or 26. When somebody would come in and say, hey, I need 30, he's like, well, Philly's going to give him 38, so we better give him the 30. That was his whole job. And he has really good relationships with agents as a result of that lengthy time period in that job. And so that means he has great conduits for information back to him about what other teams are thinking, about what other teams are doing. And I think that is the thing that has really come through in these drafts. He knew he had to go up to get Broderick Jones. He knew he was able to trade back and still get Darnell Washington. He knew he could sit there at 20 and one of those top tackles would fall and then sit there at 51 and still get Zach Frazier. When I'm sitting there looking and trying to do the mock draft, whether it was my own official mock draft or with, just like playing around with the PFF machine or whatever, it's like, I don't know if I don't have that knowledge. I don't have, I'm looking at this like if my team needs a center, I'm moving up. I'm not going to sit here and wait.
Yeah.
But he knew, and he got it right. 2 years in a row. I think that is such an incredible strength of his that is really coming through with these last 2 drafts.
It certainly looks that way. And like, that's the funny thing about it, right? Like me, I've been saying, like, listen, the rules that we thought we understood with Kevin Colbert, throw them out the window, because like last year they traded up to get Broderick Jones, then they traded back to get Darnell Washington, and then got an extra pick and got Nick Herbig, and all of it was amazing. And we were all like, wow, all these guys are useful in their first year and helping the team somehow. And so this year we're thinking, all right, well, they were pretty aggressive in moving around, whether it was up or down last year, so they'll probably be aggressive again. They don't make one trade on draft day, and then they still get another class that we're like, these are all guys we talked about liking. Peyton Wilson was my top linebacker. I loved Roman Wilson. I said for about 2 months that I loved Roman Wilson. So I was like, that's a win in my book. You and I both said if they can get one of Fautanu and the other like 5 or 6 tackles we talked about in the first round and Zach Frazier, that's a mega win for the offensive line. They did all of that. And then they still got a guy like Mason McCormick who could maybe turn into the starting guard whenever Salem Waller or Daniels move on from this offensive line. Like, to me, this is impressive stuff. And again, we don't know if these guys are going to turn out. We might even see like, one of these guys have a Devin Bush 1.5 years where they're amazing, get hurt, and then they might stink again. So we don't know for sure if these draft classes are actually amazing. No one's saying that either of these classes are the 1974 draft class yet. But as far as evaluating players and getting guys in places we weren't sure they could, like last year, we all said, like, if they get Broderick Jones, they're not getting Joey Porter Jr. And if they spend anywhere else with that first second round pick at 32nd overall, they're probably not getting Keanu Benton. And somehow they got all 3 last year. So it's remarkable to me to see the value that they've been able to get at the pieces that they've been able to get. And then this could be the starting of the new core that gets the Steelers back to being a powerhouse team someday.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, it's fair to evaluate the draft. We don't know how these players are going to turn out, but you evaluate the process, right? You look at the board and what was available to them, the moves that they did and did not make, and you say, oh, was this a good move? And was that a good move? And yeah, some of that requires the benefit of hindsight, but some of it doesn't. We can all agree that the Atlanta Falcons had a bad first-round pick, right? It doesn't matter if Michael Penix turns out to be good or bad. It was just a bad idea, right? Yeah. Okay, so it doesn't matter. And I think you can say the opposite about the Steelers. I think they had a great process here. If Troy Fautanu goes out and, I don't know, wrecks his knee in OTAs and is never the same player again, like, I'm not going to hold that against Omar Khan. Like, I think it was a good draft, right? And so, like, I think it's fair to say that. The other thing you mentioned about the trades, and everyone had this idea. I swear, when in our media sessions with him, so many people asked about him being aggressive. Oh, are you aggressive? And at the owners' meeting this year, he actually said, you know what? I think I'm patient. Now, I don't know if that was a hint.
Maybe it was.
But I certainly feel like we were on the wrong track. It was not aggression for aggression's sake. In fact, it's not being aggressive when you know that's the move you have to make, right? That's not aggressive at all. That's just doing what you have to do. And he was patient and showed his patience in this draft. And I think, man, his ability to navigate the draft board is way up there. I don't know about you, but for me, it was almost like a shock to the system of reading every evaluator of the draft, whether it was PFF or Mel Kiper. I have not found a single person that had a bad thing to say about the Pittsburgh Steelers draft. And then, if you followed the Steelers, even though there were some years where they out-scouted other teams and the consensus, right? And they got guys that nobody else thought was good that turned out to be good. That happens sometimes, but most of the time, the reaction to the Steelers draft was like,
Right.
Now, even when they turned out to be good, now certainly over the last 4 or 5 years of Kevin Colbert's term, they did not. But I think that to me is just such a huge difference. The ability to find value on the board, and it makes everything you do easier.
I wanted to touch on this before we moved on to Fautanu with a closer look here, but. You mentioned Kevin Colbert. That was kind of where I was going to go next was, a lot of people point at the last 5 years and they think like those were disastrous. And let's face it, I mean, they haven't yielded a lot of success. You look at the 2019 draft, Devin Bush didn't work out. Chase Claypool is no longer in the team. Granted, this front office flipped that into a really good pick for the Steelers, but Kenny Pickett certainly didn't work out. And there's other picks in there as well. There's a lot of guys that aren't even on the team anymore in some of those classes. And people point to that and say it set up the problem. So there's some people ask, why wasn't Omar Khan up sooner? And I wanted to ask your opinion on this, and I want to explore this more in a complete episode on another day. But I feel like part of what Kevin Colbert was also up against at the end of their one, he was dealing with Ben Roethlisberger and like at the end of his career, and you try to draft around him. But I felt like the Steelers, for several of those draft classes, for good or for ill, were simply trying to draft like the biggest one position that they felt was the one thing that if they could just get this one thing right, it would get them over the hump and make them a Super Bowl champion, not just a Super Bowl, because they were a contender in a lot of those years. But like when they drafted Devin Bush, when they drafted Terrell Edmonds, even though Terrell Edmonds admittedly was a reach from the door, but that was a team that like they were close to being Super Bowl champion. They needed a safety to help cover the middle part of the field, and they thought Terrell Edmonds could be that guy. Do you feel like that was part of the reason there, or do you think like there was just a whole problem with their draft process for years?
Well, I think it's two parts, right? It is a lot easier. The worse your team is, the easier it is to have a good draft because you have more needs.
True.
It's easier to play the board. You can go different directions. If you go into the draft and you say, all we really need is a linebacker, that becomes a very difficult thing to do, right? Like it's much more, if you go in there and say, hey, we need like 5 or 6 things, let's just get the most of them we can. It's a lot easier to make the board work your way. So I think that is more difficult. But I think the thing that really fell apart was for the Steelers is that they did not really do a very good job of reacting to trends and changes in the way the league valued positions. And I think it left them on an island in terms of they were thinking something that was so far different than the rest of the league that it caused them to make almost catastrophic moves. I mean, Terrell Edmonds is a safety at 28, very good player. I think an underrated player, but clearly not worth that pick. The trade up for an off-ball linebacker to number 10 in the draft, I understand it had been a need for the Steelers for a long time. Heck, still is a need. Maybe they're hoping that Patrick Queen and Peyton Wilson finally put an end to that, but you're not going to get good value. And so those moves erased a lot of Najee Harris running back in the first round. Like when you're running counter to the league's trends, you have to hit them because if you don't, like now you've put yourself in a place where you can't succeed if they don't all hit, and they didn't. And I think if you're at the other end, if you're doing what Omar has done and you're doing a very good job of navigating value from pick to pick to pick, look, I mean, like Darnell Washington was a pick that was great value. I don't think he had a great rookie season. I'm not sure he's going to be a great player, but it doesn't matter because you got him at 93 in the 3rd round. And so, like, who cares if he's not good? Because you got great value for the pick, right? And Corey Trice was a player that a lot of people had in the 4th round. If your 4th round pick tore his ACL, never played it down, you'd be kind of freaking out right now. Now Corey Trice is like a bonus player from that class because you got him in the 7th. And so I think the navigation of the value, it gives you that additional that built-in safety factor, right? That you don't have when you're reaching for a player.
Exactly. I feel like you're hitting on what I'm hitting on there. I think a lot of it was just the circumstances that forced the Steelers into certain holes in those times where it's like, look, like let's say Devin Bush worked out at the time, or let's say Terrell Edmonds turned out to be what Minka Fitzpatrick, now is for the Steelers. Like those teams are so much, are with the pieces that were already on them, they become that much closer to elite and being serious contenders there. Yeah, I feel like that's why I wanted to address that there. I want to talk though more about Troy Fautanu, how he fits with Broderick Jones, and how on whether they could be an elite offensive tackle pair in the NFL. That and more here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Alan Saunders, stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you that this show is also brought to you by FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and the NHL, and meanwhile, baseball is in full swing. That makes FanDuel your number one place to go to right now to make sure you can bet on every game in all the leagues. Right now, new customers can get $150 back in bonus bets guaranteed with your first bet, win or lose. That's $150 to use on point spreads, money lines, player props, and so much more. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, and on all in an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and you'll make your first bet an automatic win. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon for new customers to get $150 back in bonus bets guaranteed. And again, that's from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We're also brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the app you need to download right to your phone today, or go to their website, gametime.co, because they make buying tickets to your favorite events an easy and non-stressful effort. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all your sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. They give you killer deals on last-minute tickets and best price guarantee that can't be beat. You can save up to 60% buying last minute for sports, concerts, and so many other events. If you're in Pittsburgh with the Pirates, it's always great to go to PNC Park. You can get the best prices on Game Time at any point in time. Maybe you want to see a big concert that's coming up. Kenny Chesney's coming this summer. You can get all those tickets available to you on Game Time, the number one place to go to get all of your tickets. Get great tickets for all those different events that are going on. Plus, the best price guarantee means you're always getting the best price. If you find tickets in the same section in a row for less somewhere else, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference of those prices. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase, or go to their website, gametime.co. Terms and conditions apply. Create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Alan Saunders of SteelersDow.com. Alan, let's talk about Troy Fautanu. I talked about him a good bit after he drafted. Before we get into him and Broderick Jones, just give me your overall just view of Fautanu, what he immediately brings to the Steelers offense.
He's an incredible athlete. He moves in space really well. When Mike Tomlin talked about him, he said the first thing that really caught his eye way back in the college football season, just when he was watching games on TV like the rest of us, was that they really built a good part of their game plan around his abilities in terms of the screen game and in terms of pulling a tackle and just getting him into space. So I think he's a great athlete. When you think about Arthur Smith and the amount of wide zone they will probably run, I think that really becomes a key factor. The second thing that really stands out to me is a tough stand-up kid. Was one everybody I talked to, and there was Washington. You can walk through the room at the NFL Combine without tripping over a Washington Husky, and I don't think anybody said anything other than that's our guy, that's our leader, that was the guy carrying the flag for that unit. And so I think you got a good character guy. He has some work to do. He's like all rookies. He's not going to be perfect. I think he's a better run blocker than a pass blocker, but he has good, he's a very mature player. He's a very, he's elevated, very different than when Broderick Jones came out. And when Broderick Jones came out, you're like, yes, this guy's a great athlete, but he's a work in progress. I think Fautanu is much more refined as a player, and I think much more ready to go week one than a player like Broderick Jones was. Also, if you want some fun, go watch Fautanu's tape against Stanford. I don't know if somebody at Stanford said something or maybe I don't know, tried to date his sister. I don't know what happened. But some Stanford dudes got to find out half of the arrangement. It was violent, and it was fun to watch.
But that's the thing. I think Fautanu, more than anything else, brings violence, brings athleticism, and like you said, I think he is more pro ready than Broderick Jones was. And again, Broderick Jones' thing was his ceiling was just so high, and the cool thing was when talking about his ceiling was just how athletic he was. And we talked about that. He had Broderick Jones last year had a 9.52 relative athletic score. The one thing that was down on him was his height, because officially he was 6'5", but his 40-yard dash time, his splits, his vertical, his broad, all of that showed great stuff, and he had great arm length, and and as far as just everything else was working in his favor. But guess what? Troy Fautanu's relative athletic score, a 9.62, just 1/10 over Broderick Jones there. He ran a little bit slower in the 40-yard dash, but had a better vertical jump, better broad jump, some work better on the explosive numbers. And I think, like you said, his arms are just a tad shorter, but actually not that much shorter, maybe a quarter of an inch shorter than his.
And even less shorter. So he's big, bigger across the chest. So
exactly.
He's a little bit short. He's 6'2", 6'3". So
he's 6'3". He's 6'3". He's a little over. He's 6'3" and 6'8".
3/4. Yeah. So I think he's a little short for a tackle, but I think the long arms help, and I think he'll probably play the right side. I think that the height thing for me makes him a right tackle, but I think he can be a very good one.
And also a reminder, and I said this on the show after he played left tackle for Washington. I know people will be like, can he play right tackle in the NFL? But the left tackle for Washington would be a right tackle in most teams because Michael Penix was left-handed. So you kind of play the role of protecting his front side, which is what Troy Fautanu will be a right tackle for the Steelers. I'm telling you that the case. I was doing a live show where a lot of people saying maybe he's the center, maybe he's actually the center, and I'm like, no. Fautanu is the tackle, and specifically, he's the right tackle. My question to you here, though, Alan, does he start day one?
I think so.
Or is there some way Dan Moore Jr. is at right tackle or Broderick Jones is at right while Dan Moore's still at left?
Well, look, I put out my way too early, I guess you could call it, depth chart, SteelersNow.com yesterday. Go there and check it out. But you got to put him somewhere, right? Where do I put him? I put Fautanu at right tackle, and I said Broderick Jones or Dan Moore at left tackle. I think that's where the battle will be this preseason. I think Fautanu is ready to go, man. I think he's going to play. Okay. And I think Zach Frazier is going to play. I think you're going to see two rookie starters day one. I think that Broderick Jones will beat out Dan Moore, but I think that to me is the bigger question. I think Troy Fautanu can play right tackle day one, and I don't want to move Broderick Jones around. I want to play him in one spot.
Yep.
And so if that's going to be left tackle this year, even if Dan Moore starts a game, I would rather just play him at left tackle the whole time and let him beat him when he beats him. I think that's a better option.
I feel you. I feel you on that. I think that makes a lot of sense. Do you think these two guys as a pair, like let's say Fautanu, Broderick Jones together, do these two guys have the makeup to potentially become like the elite offensive tackle pair of the NFL?
I think so. I mean, look, Broderick Jones is, you said it, limitless potential. Like that, like he could be the best tackle in the NFL. I'm not saying he's not right now. He's not even really close right now, but he has the physical tools to be the best tackle in the NFL. We'll see how good he gets. I think Fautanu can be very good. He does not have maybe as elite of physical tools, but I think he's a lot closer to his upside right now. And so I think, and you throw Zach Frazier in there. And then the other part about this that really interests me is that, offensive linemen, like these guys are inseparable. They do everything together. And now you throw Mason McCormick in the mix. You've got four guys that are all 23 or 24 years old. In fact, Broderick Jones is younger than Mason McCormick and Zach Frazier. He might be, I think he's the same age as Fautanu. So, you have this group of guys that is going to grow up together. This is going to become pros together. And when you talk about the chemistry that you could create by having a 4-man offensive line all come up together, it's like a recruiting class in college. Like it's not something you see in the NFL when you're talking about bringing an entire unit up at the same time. There might be some weeks this season where Russell Wilson's like, what the heck, man? Stupid rookies, but but I think the long-term upside is very, very high.
I agree with you here. Like, they coming in the class. I mean, also the Steelers kind of did that before with Pouncey in 2010, DeCastro in 2012, and Gilbert was 2011, 2012, 2013. He was around that, but Gilbert was right around then too. Like, that's kind of what built the last core of guys. And Rowan Foster was undrafted, but he came up in a similar time. That's what built their last class. And I remind people, back in the early 2010s when people were asking questions of the Steelers offensive line, and Kevin Colbert said, give them time. They're going to run like a pack of horses. And they certainly ran like a pack of horses when they got together and they were able to stay healthy together. I think that's what they're trying to do with this young crew of offensive linemen.
I think so. And I think it's a good group to build it around. Personal character, toughness, physicality, advanced. Dude, this whole draft class is full of just really high-level football minds. I've gotten a chance to talk to most of them in the pre-draft process. And, and they're smart kids, man. They're gonna pick it up quick. I do not think there's going to be hesitation about playing these guys early because they are older and they have a lot of college experience and they're just smart kids. Like, I think they're going to get it.
I agree. So I think there's a lot of upside and a lot of reason to believe in these young offensive linemen. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to switch off the draft for a little bit and talk about the position they didn't get, slot corner, and a particular player that people want to see return to Pittsburgh. It's not Shannon Sullivan. It's not Patrick Peterson, but a lot of questions about Cameron Sutton, who was released from the Lions. We'll talk about why he was released whether it would make sense for the Steelers to get him. Will they get him? All that here and more on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Alan Saunders, stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you that our show is also brought to you by Monopoly Go. I've been told I'm a competitive person, and that all stems back from the game nights that I used to play with my family growing up. We used to play all sorts of different games, but every game night would end with the same way: the Super Bowl of games, Monopoly. And whenever I won that, I felt like I had the championship belt around my shoulder, holding it up all week, talking trash, telling my old man to go stick his sad face somewhere else. But that's the thing. It was just once in a while. Now with Monopoly Go, I can play him and all my friends anytime I want in a game that's been downloaded over 150 million times. It's extremely popular and extremely fun. Download Monopoly Go to right now today on your phone. It's a new twist on Monopoly where you can play hundreds of different Monopoly boards in crazy locations. You can even build up your own cities and bring in big money. Best part, I can still beat my family and friends. Whether I charge them rent for iconic properties like Boardwalk and Park Place, or I put a heist on their vaults, all of it can be shown on the Monopoly leaderboards where I'm trying to rise every single day. Get in the game and join your friends. Download Monopoly Go now today, free on the App Store or on Google Play. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. Alan, let's get to the Cameron Sutton question. I addressed this briefly on my last podcast. That was one of our bonus episodes, but I wanted to talk about this with someone else who's covered Cam Sutton and has been paying attention to the situation that was. Now, the Cameron Sutton, saga was very interesting to say the least. Cameron Sutton, of course, played for the Steelers for several years, was a good starting cornerback, one of the few starting cornerbacks that they drafted really well over the past 10 years, and then signed in free agency before last season with the Detroit Lions. Everyone was sad to see him go. Didn't have a great year with the Lions, but he was a veteran. He was still a guy that they could depend upon to play well in the secondary. And then all of a sudden, I'm covering March Madness, for the Post-Gazette. I'm on a basketball court and I see this Cameron Sutton alert go on my phone. I'm like, wait, what's this? And Cameron Sutton has been evading the police for weeks at one point. That's what this report indicated. And eventually he did turn himself in, but it was for domestic violence charges. And he was charged with felonies initially. And there's a lot of things about this case that people were like, whoa. Now there were rumors about him throwing, a woman out a window or anything like that. I didn't see the affidavit describe that, but they did describe a physical altercation. There was violence used by him against a woman in the charges. The charges have since been dropped to a misdemeanor. They are not gone. I think that's something to differentiate, because some people say, oh, the charge is just gone, so he's fine now. No, he has a hearing today, if you're listening to this on Monday, in Florida. So all that being said, Alan, what's your appraisal of the situation, of just what the status that he's in? And then what do you think of, my colleague at the Post-Gazette, Jerry Dulac, saying, having a story, hey, source, Cameron Sutton met with Omar Khan and Mike Tomlin. What do you make of this entire situation?
Let me start with what I know of Cam Sutton, the person. I think it's useful to provide that context. If you had texted me while you were covering that basketball tournament and said a former Steeler that we both covered is on the run from police, I probably would have named about 50 guys before I got to Cam Sutton.
Yeah.
I was very surprised to see that. And I always thought Cam was very soft-spoken and very intelligent individual. Obviously, I'm not, in position to judge the facts of the case against him. Somebody is going to be, and that legal process is playing out in Florida. And concurrently, the NFL will run its own investigation into this, like it does in all instances of domestic violence. So, if Cam Sutton is found guilty of what is now a misdemeanor, domestic battery, he will face a mandatory minimum suspension of 6 games. It could be more. There are mitigating factors or aggregating factors. And even if he is not found guilty, he can still be suspended by the NFL for an indiscriminate amount of time. So, depending on the way the legal process plays out, we may learn something. We may not fully learn something. Also, he has to be signed by a team before he can begin to serve that suspension.
That's the other part of this. Yeah.
So if he just sits there on his couch those 6 weeks, or however long happens to be, just stay with him forever and ever. My feeling with all of these is that you have these policies in place for a reason. You have a period of time where a player is not allowed to play, is punished for their actions. And I think it's appropriate to give people second chances in life. Should the Pittsburgh Steelers be the team to do that? Look, I think he's a player that I think their relationship with him will probably be the answer to that question. And Mike Tomlin was asked very virally at the owners meeting about his conversations with Cam Sutton, and his response was none of your business. So, look, I just said that I think I was surprised by this, and this was out of character for Cam Sutton. Maybe Mike Tomlin has a different opinion. Maybe he doesn't like Cam Sutton that much. Maybe he said it was only a matter of time before that guy did something wrong. Well, in that case, maybe the Steelers should not be the team to bring him back. But if they had my perception of his personality, yeah, I think something like that could be appropriate. These things are difficult. I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer. And I think people are right to feel the way they want to feel. But I do think that Cameron Sutton will play in the NFL again.
I think he will too. Especially, the reducing of the charges to misdemeanors, is an indication of that. I just don't know if the Steelers are going to make this happen now, because here's the other thing is that, we're talking about if people are thinking, oh, just sign Cam Sutton and your slot corner answers are questions are answered. Well, it wouldn't be for the first month and a half of games. And that's a significant chunk of games to miss for a person you want to start at slot corner. And again, we have to see how this whole process plays out. Maybe he's acquitted. Who knows? I don't know all the details of the plays. I've read the affidavit online, just seeing like, okay, so that's what's being alleged here. We have to see how that plays out, give everyone their fair day in court. But the Steelers have to gauge, and I think that's why they probably had this conversation with Cam Sutton where and whenever they had it. But they probably are trying to gauge, like, okay, is this real? We don't want to not only be associated with this, we don't have to deal with this. We want to make sure that we're like, hey, we got a crew of guys that are coming into training camp and they're just looking to work. We're not worried about anything else, any legal processes. We're just worried about football. And so as long as these charges aren't completely erased, like if he's not just exonerated and removed from any threats like that to, in a legal case, I don't think that they'll be picking him up. And I know that, and listen, like you said, when we talked to Cam Sutton was always like one of the nicest guys, especially us as reporters. Like, he would give us so much great stuff. There were times that he'd be talking and we'd be like, all right, Cam, you don't have to keep talking anymore. We got the answer. And he just keeps going because he wants to give us, information and stuff. He wants to talk. He likes talking to us. So for like you said, if there was, if I was asked to name 20 people that I thought were ex-Steelers who got in trouble, I would not have even thought of Cam Sutton. I've met him in person away from football, and he was very nice. So that's the thing, is that one, I also want to point this out here. Like, we're saying these things. We're just reporters. We do not actually know these guys outside of when we talk to them in the locker room for the most part. Like, we, unless we develop, more closer personal relationships with them, away from the game, a person can sell you something in a locker room for years. No one knew Aaron Hernandez was a murdering demon, like the way that he was with his years in New England. And I'm not saying Cam Sutton's that, but when we're talking about him this way, all we're saying is, like, from our experiences as people who had to be around him day in and day out for years, we did not pick this up, and it makes us at least drawn to question what all's happening here. And maybe if things did clear up, the Steelers would be willing to bring him back into the organization.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to imagine. Like, look, Aaron Hernandez, yes. Did anybody know it was a murder? I don't know. I don't think so. But look, I mean, Aaron Hernandez had a rap sheet like the size of the phone book. Right. So, like, you kind of knew that Aaron Hernandez was bad news, whether you knew Aaron Hernandez was a murderer or not. I don't want to say that like we can't be fooled, but I think you do get pretty good insight into what kind of person someone is when you're around them in that close proximity year after year, day after day. And so, look, I'm hoping that Cam Sutton is able to get his life in order, that he learns from this, and that but like, somebody was asking me this during the draft process about T'Vondre Sweat and his DUI, and about how it was going to make him fall down the leaderboard. Like it or not, the NFL is going to overlook this stuff as a league if the player can help them win. That is what is going to happen. And so Look, I think the Steelers would be doing themselves a disservice if they didn't look into it. They have done that. We'll see what decision they make, but I think that's the prudent course of action right now.
I certainly see. We'll wait to see what happens with his hearing that's coming up this week and how things progress there. We'll keep you updated with that here and more on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm Chris Carter. He's Alan Saunders. Read all his work at SteelersNow.com. Alan, anything you got coming out this week that people need to be on the lookout for?
Yeah, we wrote 110 stories over the 3 days of the 24 NFL draft.
Sick.
You know what I got going on? I'm going on vacation tomorrow.
There you go.
You got nothing from me coming. I don't know. Ask Nick Farabee.
Hey, that's a good problem to have right there. We hope you enjoy your vacation. I'm glad I got you on here before you went off and fished or did whatever Alan Saunders does. Alan Saunders on vacation probably works. Knowing this man, he probably does something stupid like that. He's like,
not this time. Not this time.
But
I mean, probably will do some work.
See, you couldn't even hold a straight face for 5 seconds and be like, I'm going to just enjoy free time and not do things because I know you. You're a maniac. You're a demon, but that's why we love you and we love having you on the show. Alan Saunders, ladies and gentlemen, of SteelersNow.com at @Saunders_PGH on Twitter/X. I'm Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and my social media handles at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday, breaking down the Pittsburgh Steelers along with our bonus episodes sometimes, like we had a lot this weekend with the NFL draft. Back tomorrow, we got Wes Euler on, and he want to talk some Zach Frazier. We'll do that tomorrow on the Locked On Steelers podcast.